Hello, everybody. I want to take just a couple of minutes this morning to talk about Elijah's wilderness experience. We all know the story, right? Elijah confronts the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel, and there's fire coming down from heaven, consuming the altar. Then he kills the 400 prophets of Baal, and then the queen Jezebel gets mad at Elijah because of what he's done, and so she threatens him with his life. And he runs. He gets scared and he runs away. But I do want to share just two verses with you out of 1 Kings chapter 19, verse 3 and verse 7. Let's look at those really quick. Verse 3 says, "And he was afraid and arose and ran for his life and came to Beersheba." That's the first half of verse 3. And then verse 7. "The angel of the Lord came again a second time and touched him and said, 'Arise, eat, because the journey is too great for you.'" There's a lot of wilderness experiences in the Bible, right? You have Jesus, 40 days, 40 nights in the wilderness to be tempted. John the Baptist spends his career in the wilderness. Then you have the Israelites being led out of Egypt into the wilderness. But out of their fears, they remain in the wilderness an extra 40 years longer than they need to. And so their lack of trust in the Lord and their fear drive them into the wilderness to walk around in circles for 40 years. And then we have Elijah. Elijah runs into the wilderness because he's afraid too. He doesn't need to be afraid. God's got his back. He's had his back when he was killing 400 prophets. False prophets, right? But he's afraid now, and he runs. He panics and he runs. But really, the more important thing that I want to talk about today is you might find yourself in a desert, in a wilderness of your own making, like Elijah. It's not one that God has necessarily called you into. But the point is that even though Elijah was running and dependent on his own, running out of fear and not dependent on the Lord to protect him, God had an appointment for him anyway at Mount Horeb. God wasn't mad at Elijah because he's running. On the contrary, it's so cool. Verse 7, the angel of the Lord tells Elijah, "Get up and eat, or the journey will be too much for you." Elijah is strengthened by God in that moment of weakness. In that moment of fear, God comes and he strengthens him, right? It doesn't matter to God why you're in the desert or how you got there. He wants to meet you there, and his grace will be enough to give you the strength to be there until he does what he needs to do in you, or in me, if I'm in the desert. Get up and eat, or the journey will be too much for you. Here's what I'm providing you strength, Paul, in this wilderness of your own making. I've got a place for you to come to. I want to meet you. You and I are going to have a conversation. I'm not abandoning you. And then, in that conversation, in that moment of the still small voice, God gives Elijah a fresh purpose, a new direction, right? He says, "Go and make so-and-so king of Aram. Then you're going to make so-and-so king of Israel. And by the way, you need to go get Elisha, because Elisha's going to be the guy who succeeds you. And I got something for him, and I got something for you with him." So that's awesome stuff. If you're in a wilderness today, only you know why you're there. But most of us can't identify with Elijah and his reason for fleeing to the wilderness. I certainly can. I know there's times I've been running. I've run away from my enemies. I've run away from my family at times. I've run away from myself even. And I've even run away from God. But in those times, in those wilderness experiences in my life, I can see a Mount Horeb in them. A point where God comes and he speaks to me. And he gives me a new outlook on my circumstances, a new purpose, and a new hope. Maybe a new instruction even. In the meantime, his grace has proven sufficient. His strength was made perfect in my weakness. Right? I'm weak. That's why I've run away. And he comes and he strengthens me in my weakness. In that moment of weakness, he strengthens me. He's not mad at me. He strengthens me. How awesome is that? So if you find yourself in a wilderness today, even if it's a wilderness of your own making, be encouraged. God is not mad at you. He's not worried about you being somewhere where you think you're supposed to be. On the contrary, God has an appointment with you in that wilderness, and he will give you the strength necessary to make it to that appointment. And in that appointment, he will talk to you. He'll ask how you're doing, he'll strengthen you, and he will give you a new perspective and a new purpose. Simply put, in the wilderness, God will amaze you. God bless you guys today.